Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Reinhard Pfeiffer. I want to welcome you on behalf of Messe München, on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Lechner, Frau Stolle, Frau Panier, all the other colleagues, on behalf of the electronica team here in Munich. And we are really delighted that we can meet in person again after 4 years. Tomorrow starts the leading World Trade Fair for electronics, the electronica, and it's a good tradition, one day before it starts, that we have this high-ranking CEO Roundtable. And we are very pleased to welcome Jean-Marc Chery, the CEO of STMicroelectronics, Jochen Hanebeck, the CEO of Infineon Technologies, Gregg Lowe, the CEO of Wolfspeed, and last but not least, Sievers, the CEO of NXP Semiconductors. And you, Mr. Sievers, you was for many, many years the chair, the head of our Exhibitors Advisory Board, and you are so familiar with electronica, and it's also a pleasure to welcome so many high-ranking persons in the auditorium, and many of them are also members of our exhibitors board. Thank you very much for coming. There is so much to say, but not from my side. We are waiting for you. We have a little premiere. After the CEO Roundtable, we have for the very first time a networking event, and we are now looking forward to the CEO meeting, to the CEO networking event later on, and I want to hand over to you, Mr. Joachim Hofer. You are our moderator. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm glad to be on this stage actually, because 2 years ago I was in an auditorium right next to here and I was alone in the room. There were a couple of camera people. So, you know, it's turbulent times, but some things are changing for the better, and that we're all here, that's a sign that things are changing for the better. Now I'd love to have our guests on this stage, and please come Jean-Marc Chery, CEO and President of Geneva-based semiconductor manufacturer STMicroelectronics. He's held this position since May 2018, joined Thomson Semiconductors in 1986, and which subsequently became ST. Jean-Marc, welcome. Please take a seat. And the next to have on stage, I'd like to invite on stage is Jochen Hanebeck. He's the CEO of Infineon and has been in this role since the 1st of April this year. He's been with Germany's biggest semiconductor company since 1994. Jochen Hanebeck, welcome. Now I'd like to introduce you Gregg Lowe from the US company Wolfspeed. He's been the CEO since September 2017. Prior to Wolfspeed, he was CEO of Freescale and spent 28 years at Texas Instruments. Welcome.
Thank you.
Gregg Lowe. And then I'd like to introduce to you Sievers. Please take a seat.
Okay.
He's the President and CEO of NXP and has been in this role since May 2020, and he joined the Dutch company in 1995. Welcome, Sievers. Please, sit down, please. Yeah, I was preparing loads of questions before this event today, and then at exactly 4 o'clock, I got news from Infineon, and so I said, well, scrap all this, what I wrote down here, and let's start with the news. So I'd love to talk to you, give you the chance, Jochen Hanebeck, to let us know what is happening at Infineon first.
Yeah, thank you, Joachim. And we don't want to hijack the event, but we made today numerous important announcements. So first of all, we look back as usual at this time of the year on the last year, and the performance of the company was exceptionally good, a new record. We also gave a positive outlook for the full fiscal year that has started. And we upgraded our target operating model, which is basically the long-term guidance to the capital markets in terms of revenue growth, where we expect more than 10% growth for the company, segment result margin up, and also free cash flow up. Furthermore, we said that we are planning a big investment in Dresden, another module at our existing site for analog mixed signal technologies, products, as well as power switches. Our claim is that we want to be the leader in power systems and IoT, and especially for power systems, you need, besides the power switches, being MOSFET, being silicon carbide in many applications in the future. You need also a lot of analog mixed signal parts. If you think about battery management, if you think about USB, if you think power systems on chip, all the way to MOSFETs. So that's going to be a major investment. Again, it's planned. It's 5 billion at the site in Dresden. And last but not least, for silicon carbide, which is the other major track where we are also expanding our facility in Kulim, Malaysia, which was already announced in February. We announced a deal with Stellantis, which is about significantly more than 1 billion on silicon carbide for them to build about 10 million cars in the second half of the decade. So lots of news today from Infineon, and you will hear more about it in detail tomorrow. But yeah, that's the package Joachim was talking about.
Yeah, so thanks very much. But you know, we've had similar news from all of you, from all the participants here on stage, and I was just wondering, and this was on one of the most important questions on my list. What is this? Those announcements, is this a direct impact of the CHIPS Acts that we see in Europe and the US? And well, let's start with a guest who came from the farthest away, Gregg Lowe from the US. You've also announced numerous new fabs.
I think the announcements of the new fabs are primarily based on the demand that we're seeing. There's skyrocketing demand for semiconductor chips. Of course, there's been a huge issue with the availability of that over the last couple of years. And specifically in the technology of silicon carbide that many of us are in here, the demand is just simply explosive. So I think it's primarily about feeding that demand. Now, where you feed it, where you put it, is going to be depending on the US CHIPS Act, the European CHIPS Act, the various different government incentives that are going to help facilitate the building of these factories. $5 billion, it's not for the faint of heart, So, having good government incentives to incentivize people to build these factories in different locations, I think are going to be pretty key. And I would imagine, Jean-Marc, you probably feel the same way.
No, exactly. I think primarily to build a fab is driven by your demand and your operating model. There is operating model fabless, there is operating model integrated. The more important, we are all together competitor, is to play with the same rule of game. To not have distortion of competition, either you play in one part of the world or another part of the world. We have to compete with the same weapons. After is competition, silicon carbide, we are a nice competitor of Infineon, of Wolfspeed, and we play with the same weapons, innovation, differentiation, technology, manufacturing. So European CHIPS Act, yes, is very important because give us the same competitive advantage than in US or potentially in Asia.
How's it at NXP?
Well, when I think about this, I have actually two elements in mind. One is what you said, Gregg, which is a staggering demand, which is not just for tomorrow, but it looks like that goes for the next 10 years. But the other one is also this deglobalization. because the fact that there is a CHIPS Act in Europe and that there is a CHIPS Act in the US is a reaction to the need for more resilience in the supply chains and also to more geopolitical turmoil. And I think that's the other big news which is happening as we speak, that these factories, these new factories, which are needed from a demand perspective, but that they start to happen now more regionalized. And we clearly have a significant and growing number of customers which are demanding firmly as a condition to be awarded for new designs that you are able to offer local manufacturing capabilities. And I think that's a significant change to the past 30 years, where the semiconductor world was probably the showcase of globalization. We could do everything. We could manufacture where we wanted, we could develop IP where we wanted to, we could sell to where we wanted to. And that is, unfortunately, I have to say personally, in reverse gear, but I think it's great how the world and how the industry tries to adjust to this new reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I fully agree. We really have to be careful. Globalization helped us all. We have established very specialized, successful business models by many of our companies and elsewhere. And now this fragmentation, this regionalization is also a danger that we are running into less cost-efficient or efficient setups. And if we even have to go into, let's say, regional IP, it will either make things a lot more expensive or it will slow down innovation, which is one of the key of our industry. So yes, I'm with you. It's requested by our customers, a response to the geopolitical landscape, but it might have side effects.
I completely agree, Jochen. I mean, I didn't mean to say this is great. I said it's great that we try to adjust.
Absolutely.
But it's the second best option.
Yes.
The globalization was clearly better for our industry. And better means more cost effective, which in the end is going to land on the consumers. So what we currently do here is the second best from a cost perspective.
But Jean-Marc, you're building a factory in Sicily. Would you have gone there without the subsidies of the Italian government?
No, I repeat, the investment of a company like ST is driven by our strategy, our ambition, so $20 billion of revenue by 2025. The fact we have an integrated operating model, so with manufacturing and technology. This is what is driven investment. Then what we say, we want to compete at the same level with the worldwide competitor. And because of the let's say, decoupling of the economy. We have everywhere in the world, big incentive provided to players from the government. Thanks God, in Europe now, we have a similar tools. And this is great, because it will enable us to compete at the same level. You know that when you build a new fab, so 5 billion for Infineon, for ST in Crolles is 6 billion, in Agrate is 4 billion, in Catania is 1 billion. Depreciation will be huge. So the manufacturing cost will be huge. If you compete against people having 50% of their investment as an incentive, you are in an unbalanced situation. So we need to compete at the same level. This is just what we are asking. If tomorrow there is no more CHIPS Act in the world, fair enough. Right. So we must be at the same competitive and same condition of competition.
But are we on the same level?
Jean-Marc has that exactly right, which is, this is just simply leveling the competition primarily with Asian-based companies. And so it allows you then to make a decision that says, hey, we're going to be in Catania, we're going to be in Dresden, because that's level. If nobody had any of those incentives, that would also be fair as well.
Yeah.
So how are our incentives in Europe compared to Asia and America? Are we competitive? Who wants to?
Well, I think this is far too early to say this. What I recently also publicly said is we have to be aware that the size of this, and the same holds true for the US, is small. And I'm not complaining about it, but 50 billion is what TSMC spends in 1 year as CapEx. So, I mean, this is not like this changes the industry now upside down, but I think it helps to get on the way. If we will be competitive, needs much more. We also need people. I mean, if we have, and people means educated people, because if suddenly we would deliver on the ambition which the EU has articulated, which is a 20% world market share in semiconductor manufacturing, we need many more engineers, which at least to my knowledge currently are not in the universities and are not growing up.
So if you say, depend the world competitive. If you tell competition is to compete in our swimming lane of a diversified company addressing the embedded electronic world, automotive and industrial, yes, it is competitive. If you ask that we have to build 3 nanometer technology and huge fab, yes, I think it's not too much competitive, but we will see. But for us, I have to say the European Chip Act is a great tool, I repeat, because putting us at the same level of incentive than worldwide, because there is clear rules of how much a country can give you when you make such investment. There is no magic, okay? You cannot do what you want. You need to demonstrate that, okay, when you make this investment, thanks to the incentive, it will be competitive against a counterfactual scenario. And you have no freedom. You cannot go to see your government and say, give me this money. Europe has to agree. So there is clear rule, okay? But what I can say, European Chip Act is nice because enable actors like us to invest 5 billion, and us, we will invest in the next 3 years, basically 6 to 7 billion US dollar at Kroll, at Agrate, and at Catania.
We just have to be careful. I fully agree. We feel a lot of political support. There's also the funds available. EU Chips Act is not completely defined how it's going to be rolled out, and I think we have to be a bit careful that it's not going to turn out as a bureaucratic monster, but that really the funds are allocated in an effective manner. And but besides that, I agree. It's very sizable. I mean,
so Dresden could still fail if you don't get the funds dedicated by the European.
We said today that we plan to build a factory under the assumption that we get adequate funding. Yes.
I think there's another angle to think about with this sort of deglobalization, and that is think about how many fabs are going to be required in the coming years. The numbers that have been announced, the demand that we talked about is skyrocketing right now. There's probably not one place in the world that could handle doing all those fabs anyway, whether it's the energy they have, water they have, or the people they have, the skilled people that Kurt was talking about. So spreading this out is probably going to make it easier for all of us to raise the capacity that's required by this accelerating demand for semiconductor chips.
Gregg, you're building new fabs in the US. Are you also considering having a fab in Europe? And what would you need to, or would you want to get to build a fab here?
Well, we made a decision to build a new fab in May of 2019 in upstate New York, and we put a shovel in the ground in March of 2020. And for those of you that remember, March of 2020 was pretty much day one of COVID in the US. It was the day everything stopped. So we continued building that fab and now are bringing that fab into production today. So I think that having the ability to do that during that time has really helped us out. We happened to pick the United States. I think it made it easier for us at the time just simply because we're a US-based company. Now we know that we need to build another factory because the demand for our products is skyrocketing right now. And we look to US and we look to Europe right now as the primary centers as to where we do that. And part of the decision process will certainly be incentives that we get. And that'll definitely be a part of that process.
Mm-hmm. As a Dutch company, how are you looking at Germany and its attractiveness for new semiconductor fabs?
Well, a couple of thoughts here. The one is our manufacturing strategy is more biased to foundry companies. So we work with foundry companies to build more capacity, and we need that globally. Indeed, we need it in Europe, we need it in the US, we continue to need it in Asia. In US, I mean, there is one which we can openly talk about because it was published earlier. We have the TSMC factory in Arizona. Actually, in the first week of December, we will be there and celebrate the first tool-in. So that's actually fantastic progress. So that factory is getting now tools installed. And that's the other side of the spectrum. We touched on silicon carbide earlier. We have a multi-billion design win on a 5 nanometer chip for automotive, which is going to run in that factory in the US because it is for a US customer. So it has to be manufactured in the US. So that's the deglobalization at work. And in that context, Germany is actually a very important place. And there are discussions ongoing to also increase the fab network in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Well, closely linked to the issue of investing in Europe and the US is obviously China. So I'd like to know, what is your view on China? You've mentioned the word deglobalization. What does that mean? And how do you react to those tensions?
Yeah, on the fab side, of course, there are numerous projects ongoing in China, but depending on how the geopolitical situation develops, we have to assume that this foundry market at least is somehow captive and will not be completely accessible. And that was for us, for example, also a reason, 130 nanometer analog mixed signal, a lot of capacity being built in China, but not so much by, let's say, the Taiwanese foundries, and we took that into consideration for our decision. Again, we need to make sure that we get supply from all parts of the world. Like Kurt said, you cannot rely on one spot for supply in the future.
I really think we all have to look at this from two sides. One is the supply chain, which is the more diversified supply chain to be more resilient against any possible changes. But of course, it's also a big market for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's also from a revenue perspective an important element. Where I still believe we need to demystify a little bit, because I often hear huge numbers, huge percentages of semiconductor companies' revenue going to China. The reality is, and I can say that for NXP, for us, it's 38% of our total revenue ships into China, but not even half of that remains in China. So in that sense, China often is only a place where a higher value module is being architected, and then it goes back into the Western world. And what I try to say is, even in case this becomes more closed off, this would just be rerouted to other places, which is a lot of effort and which is not easy. But it's not like that these big percentages, which are always being quoted in newspapers, is all for China. A lot of that actually could also go eventually then through India or other countries.
No, for ST, clearly China is close to Kurt. Let's say NXP weight, okay, for us is about 30% of our total revenue. Yeah. So clearly this is a market we do not want to escape. We want to continue to support. You know that for the smart mobility, so electrical car and automatic driving assistance system, okay, China will be a fantastic driver. So we have to continue to address. The point is, we just want that the world provide to us stable rule. We can adapt anything, but if rules are changing every 6 months, it is difficult. So we will deal with the current rules, so constraints and export rules. We will be fully compliant. We know the recipe how to adapt ourselves, but please, this rule must be stable.
My hope would be that it's in our interest to sell green products to China, make their economy green, more efficient. It's the interest of mankind, and that we are not imposing more or get more rules in that regard, limiting selling products to China which are far away from any application that might be of special interest. We are decarbonizing the Chinese economy.
Is this a realistic scenario, sir? Because we do see the opposite happening, right? We do see increasing tensions. We do see more restrictions. You probably prepare internally for a decoupling.
It depends a little bit. I mean, if you look at it from a Western point of view, and Gregg might chip in, but what the Americans are, or the Western world, I have to say, are imposing are to go for specific applications which are, let's say, in the national interest. and at the same time inhibiting maybe the progress in advanced nodes. But once again, shipping silicon carbide, IGBTs, whatever battery management systems to China makes Chinese economy greener. Shipping IGBTs into wind plants makes electricity greener. That's in our interest. So I hope that there is some reason for what we are restricting ourselves in China.
I think that there's another element to consider, and it kind of goes back to the demand piece of it. So the more efficient use of energy, the more efficient use of greener energy, the adoption of more green energy, all drives a fundamental increased demand for semiconductor chips. Because it's smarter technologies, it's controlling it better, it's using things like silicon carbide to transfer more of the energy from the wind actually to the location and so forth. And so I think this has become very, very, very apparent in the United States, all throughout Europe, certainly Japan, and I think China is seeing the same thing. So I think everybody understands and has become very much more aware of the fact that we have a certain obligation, I think, to be better and more efficient in the use of energy. And that is a good thing for the world, obviously, but it's also a great thing for the semiconductor
Gregg, this is
industry.
a business logic, but
Sorry?
this is the logic of business, right? Of
Yeah.
economy, but there's another logic, and this is a logic of power and nations.
Yeah.
And don't you think that you have to take into account that, at the moment politics is prevailing?
Yeah, but we must be consistent.
I don't know.
You cannot say that the most important challenge of the world now is to continue to grow, to create value for people.
Decarbonize.
But decarbonize in the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, we cannot say that, and that's a no. Let's focus on something else. And I don't know if you know this ratio, but each gram of CO2 we can generate altogether with manufacturing, we are saving 5 grams of CO2 in the world, thanks to our product. And that doesn't mean that we are not fighting to reduce our emission. Okay, we can produce at zero emission under our control. Mm-hmm. We know the process. As far as we use renewable energy, each time, we will generate 1 gram of CO2, we will find 5 grams. So it's good for the world. It's good for the challenge we have. Mm-hmm. But after, sovereignty and so on is something else. But don't forget this challenge is the most important challenge of the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So, if I understood you correctly, it's good that we're having the fabs of the competitors here, but we should also attract more foundries in Europe, right?
Of course, because as you will probably ask in a minute, some of these foundries are in Taiwan, which is seen as another risk in this geopolitical puzzle, and the diversification from their perspective is also a good move for them, but actually for everybody else who is down the food chain, depending on them. And as I said earlier, I mean they are building and have built in the US. I think they have started to build in Japan, and there is enough discussion about possibly building in Europe. So yes, I think that's also part of it.
Do you agree?
Fully agree. I think if you look at what has been announced by ST, by us, by others, Intel, Magdeburg, I think what is required is more capacity in this regime of 28 to 12 nanometers, where a lot of products gonna be built in order also fitting to our value chains in Europe, which are heavy on automotive, industrial, IoT. And I think in that regard, we have to do more.
It's just there are a few things which are constantly mixed up. This whole supply crisis of the last 2 years has nothing to do with where the factories are. That is a completely different mechanism. So if those factories would have been in Europe and the US, we would have had the same supply crisis. There was simply not enough factories. The other one is, I believe in maybe 5 to 8 years from now, when we look back to this period 2020 to 2022, I don't think people will speak that much anymore about the supply situation. But what will differentiate us again is innovation. So I find it, and that's both for the CHIPS Act in Europe as well as in the US, I find it absolutely paramount that we don't forget about innovation, because you have to fill these factories on the long run. And if Europe and Germany doesn't have innovation leadership, then the factories are actually of no value on the long run. So it's important to have a proper balance. We've been falling far too much behind on manufacturing. That's very true. But forgetting innovation on that would be, I think, a significant mistake.
Just one question about Dresden. Why is Dresden more attractive, say, for example, than Austin, when you have the CHIPS Act in the US?
I've been to Austin, and we have a fab in Austin. It's a nice place to be. But look, we have already a big site in Dresden, and economy of scale matters. That's why Jean-Marc is building in Grenoble and in Catania, and we are building in Kulim, Malaysia, and in Dresden. And there we have the analog mixed signal know-how. So it's a lot easier to start a factory at an existing site, scaling it up. You gain economy of scale right away without basically doing anything, and that is matters. And the times will come, as Kurt says, where efficiency matters again, and where innovation matters again. Even though I have to say, in terms of power semiconductors, and that's probably where we are all here in. I do expect quite a long time shortage because we will face now two big end markets meeting each other with electromobility, and at the same time renewables. At the same time, we have to make data center efficient. And I'm not sure whether all of us will be able to catch up in terms of capacity, meeting this demand of decarbonization.
So there's no danger of these subsidies leading to over.
Sorry?
There's no danger of these subsidies leading to overcapacity.
Certainly not in the power side of things. You know, if you look at the trend that Jochen was just talking about, the trend moving from and away from the internal combustion engine towards EVs is unstoppable. Most car companies have abandoned all new development of internal combustion engine cars or ICE vehicles. We actually like to say that we're ending the ICE age. And that trend is unstoppable. And I think that what we're anticipating is through the end of this decade, for power semiconductors and specifically silicon carbide power semiconductors, we could see a 40% compounded annual growth rate, which means all of us will be running as fast as we can, trying to catch up to the demand. And I think that's just going to be the case, because as these car companies flip over more and more and more to an all-electric future, you know, it's going to put a lot of stress on that. And I think that this is probably the most interesting transition that the auto industry has ever gone through. And so they're going to want to get it right. And I think Kurt is exactly right too, that now they need to be thinking about innovation in a different kind of way in the powertrain, because it used to be pistons and fuel injections and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And now it's going to be semiconductor technology driving the innovation for the electric car.
From an American perspective, is Europe and other car makers or the tier ones, are they innovative enough?
Oh, I think they are all getting to the point where they know that their future is going to be based on new innovations in electric powertrain platforms. I think that is very, very clear in my mind. And that's clear across Europe, that's clear across the US, it's clear across China. You know, sees it as a way to leapfrog over the internal combustion engine challenge they've had. The Koreans are coming out. So Vietnam has now invented a car industry that's electric based. So, you know, I think that transition is unstoppable.
I think Europe came a little late, but that's understandable because of the history. I mean, that's much tougher than, say, in China, where there was no legacy, where you start from scratch on the electric. But over the last 2-3 years, I think Europe has come a very long way and really leads the way globally. I would personally say extremely impressive.
Another topic that made headlines in Germany was last week when the German government rejected offers of Chinese companies to buy relatively, at least in one case, relatively old German semiconductor fab. What went through your minds when you read about the actions of the German government against China?
I can maybe kick it off. I'm not an expert on German government stuff, but I think the governments are interested in protecting their own national interests. And I don't think it's an anti-China thing. I think it's what's in the best interest of Germany. It was a similar situation 5 years ago when this guy tried to buy this guy. And the US government shut it down.
Yes, you know, unfortunately, yeah.
Or fortunately, depending on where you think. And so I don't think it was against something. I think it was really, my guess is it was probably what's in the best interest of Germany. I don't know.
Maybe I can share with you this anecdote. So we bought 3 years ago a company that is capable to make raw silicon carbide ingot. And the technology we will use is the technology we will use in Catania to grow our own capacity on top of the great partnership we have with Wolfspeed. Hey, this company was honored by China.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we bought to Chinese people.
Yep.
I think it is an expression of a renewed and long time overdue understanding that semiconductors are just essential for what in the US they called it critical infrastructure. And that's a very good thing because it finally gets microelectronics to where I think it should have been longer time already, which is actually in the center of the interest for the whole economic food chain in Europe. So in that sense, you might argue, was it right or wrong in that particular little case? But the mindset behind that of taking care for microelectronics for Germany and for Europe, I think is a very good one and is only consistent with the CHIPS Act.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a controversial topic. If you might want to ask a question and take part in this discussion, so feel free. We got two microphones. Anybody in the room who'd love to ask a question? Yes, here in the middle, please.
Maybe I can do it without the microphone.
here's one.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Thanks, Don Akkermans, Lente, the Netherlands. Lente is the corporate foundation of Electromedia. Also talking about SDG and all that. Last year at Productronica there was ethics and electronics. It was a forum. And tomorrow there will be also a forum. And Philips was last year at the Ethics and Electronic Forum. Philips told a story about their foundation that they were good and were telling about it intensely. Last year, Philips lost 55% of their value because of these things with these, I think you guys know better than I, with all these, so 55. So now the new CEO is fighting like crazy to get that value back. Last week, crazy news, the international global brand research learned that the valuation of Philips brand had grown with 6%. So on the stock exchange, Philips lost value. The brand valuation came up, probably because of the foundation that Philips had, and is telling intensely what they do for the world. Also had to do with SDG. Now my question is, we did a small research under the exhibitors of Electronica. What we learned is that almost no company is communicating on their corporate websites about SDG and not about ethics, business ethics. The fun thing is NXP and Infineon were also in that research. Good news for you guys. You came out really good. But many of them didn't mention anything about business ethics or SDG. So my question would be, why do you think there's so little communication about SDG and ethics on the corporate website of the exhibitors, and what would be your recommendation?
Well, let me maybe respond first, because Philips is close to my heart, since we've been originating out of Philips. And by the way, the whole situation around Philips, I feel personally, is very sad. If you know what value Philips represents for the semiconductor industry, Philips founded TSMC and Philips founded ASML. And also NXP happens to be a baby of Philips. If I understood you right, you talked about ESG. And I can only tell you that at least in our company, I made ESG 20% of the bonus for all of our employees. So it matters extremely much. And the interesting finding is that it went way beyond that, because it starts to be an enormous attractiveness point to find new people, to actually attract graduates from universities, because they appeal to this a lot. And it keeps people in the company who might have left otherwise. So I cannot say why or why not other companies are doing this more or less. I can only report from our side, we have very good experience with putting it pretty much in the middle of a lot of what we do.
I think Kurt makes a really good point, two really good points that we echo as well at Wolfspeed. Your second point, I think, resonates with me a lot, and that is employees want to know that the company they're working for is making an impact in these areas. And it's a really important factor with the entire workforce, but especially with the younger workforce. And so, you have to kind of up your game on the ESG topics. We have done the same thing, though, as well as kind of putting your money where your mouth is. We're putting bonus dollars also associated with achieving these kinds of goals. And so I think more and more companies are going to be heading in this direction.
And I would like to tell you something. A company like ST, okay, we are committed to what we call corporate sustainability. And it's not a nice to have, or it's not a fashion. It's a must do. But by the way, you give us opportunity to speak about what we are asking for is to have norms, that everybody will be measured according the same rules, according the same metrics, and everybody will be audited and certified. So yes, okay, company can communicate more. Of course, generally speaking, private companies, they not make buzz. They just make their job. And us, and I guess my colleagues, we are committed to carbon neutrality by 2027. We are committed to renewable energy and so on and so forth. But we are not making buzz. We are doing our job because it's must do. It's must do because we are spoken about. The biggest challenge the world has to do is to continue to grow and create value for people, but okay, with a full environmental respect and diversity, gender diversity, country diversity. But it's a must do. So we are not communicating a lot. But we need the same rules everywhere in the world to be audited and certified. This is what we have to fight all together for.
Are there any more questions? Yes, there's one, and there are a couple of here. Just.
Yes, hello, Michael Gude from Cologne Chip. What technology, you are talking about innovations, will fill your fabs in the future, do you think? And what place will neuromorphic chips have in this future?
I didn't get it.
Yeah, if I understood it correctly, there's a little bit of an echo in that one. You're asking about what technology we're innovating in?
Neuromorphic.
I didn't hear.
Neuromorphic chips.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't know.
You share your technology roadmap, I share my technology roadmap.
Is there anybody who wants to answer about neuromorphic chips?
I'm not an expert in that. You can ask me a question on silicon carbide, I'd be happy to answer.
I'm not sure whether it works in silicon carbide, but yeah, it's more, I think, a topic of architecture than the technology now. But certainly one of the interesting directions besides quantum computing and the likes. So leading us very far down the way.
I guess you speak about one way of implementing artificial intelligence on silicon. And that is an absolute core focus area, at least for us, because a lot of what we discussed earlier about the impact of smarter microelectronics for the better of the world is based on artificial intelligence. So this is a very central and very important part of research and entering development.
But I would add one element to it, and that is all of the technologies that we invest in have a huge amount of innovation still left in it. And that is something that I think all of the companies are driving, at. And Kurt rightly, said innovation has to remain the forefront of our companies, because that's how we.
It's the lifeline of this industry.
That's exactly right.
Just know.
And it always has been.
Yeah.
Altogether, we are spending what, 15% of our annual sales in R&D?
Yeah.
You more.
Even
maybe.
more.
Yeah, I'm more.
So 15 to 20%, if you take all our listed company, okay, we are spending between 50 to 20%
Billions
in
of
R&D.
dollars.
What is the best commitment than semiconductor on innovation? I think numbers are very clear.
So we've got a couple of more questions over here. Okay.
Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Ojo Yoshida Report. I think during the discussion, the gentleman talked about the SiC silicon carbide. We will be in the shortage for some time. And given that situation, where do you guys see in terms of technology competition with what's happening in China in the development of silicon carbide? Where are they in vis-a-vis where you guys are, and what innovations that they are making? But in this current environment of decoupling the economy, maybe if this forum was 10 years ago, you might have said that we would have the silicon carbide joint venture with Chinese companies. But maybe that's not happening.
It's a great question, and Junko, you're the one that doesn't need to introduce yourself. I think all of us know you super well. Maybe I'll kick that off. I think the demand for silicon carbide is growing at an incredible pace, and when that happens, companies invest money to be able to be successful in that. Certainly the three companies here for sure are investing in that. Kurt's team is working, across that spectrum as well. But so I don't think it's any one particular country. I would say this technology is a tricky technology. It's one that has there's not a real big amount of knowledge of the technology in the world right now. So I think it's one where, growing this technology, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience. We know for sure that the Chinese are investing in semiconductors in general, silicon carbide as well, and I think they see that as a important piece to their national interests. But I think we're seeing that around the world, and I think the most important thing for all of our companies to do is realize that we need to continue driving that innovation and driving costs down and yields up and innovation and so forth to remain in a leadership position in this technology.
I take a bit more paranoid stance on that one. We do see in China really the intent to leapfrog silicon power semiconductors towards wide bandgap, in particular silicon carbide. And there are numerous companies ongoing, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are soon able to provide some sort of material or alike. It's just, statistically very likely. And so from our end, that was always the motivation for us to push towards commanding power systems, and not only the individual switch, but rather understand the application, understand the system, and derive the whole chipset out of that, power switches, drivers, microcontrollers, software, in order to stay ahead. So I'm a bit paranoid on Chinese competition in silicon carbide.
So we're running out of time, but we have time for one question. There's someone here right in the first row.
Ajit.
This is Ajit Manocha from Philips, from SEMI. Of course, I've been had the privilege to work with ST and Philips and NXP in my previous life and Global Foundries. So first of all, I agree with all the comments made here. The growth is really real. SEMI publishes data every quarter. There are 81 new fabs that have been announced to be commissioned between 2021 and 25. So yes, all these CHIPS Acts and subsidies in different countries are very relevant to promote that. But my question is a little bit more on from a personal interest point of view. There are 3 European companies sitting here, the 3 top European companies. All the recent tension between US and China, what role you think you can play to make peace between US, Europe, and China? Because I think we all depend on China very heavily. We cannot afford China to not comply with the national security or other. So I can understand the requirements of US. I think going regional impact is not going to be a good thing. We need to globally work together. So what advice you will give to the US policymakers so that Europeans and US are together along with Japanese and South Koreans and bring peace on this conflict which is growing rapidly?
Jean-Marc?
Oh, I can start. I can go in the swimming pool if you want. No, but you know that, generally speaking, as a CEO, we must be careful to never elevate ourselves above our situation. We are driving company. We are driving stakeholders, so shareholder, people, and customer. And we have to play with rule and be compliant with rule. So this is what we are doing. We don't like. Yes, we don't like the conflict, the trade conflict between China and US. Decoupling of the economy, we don't like it. Now, the only thing we can do is to warn and to warn our let's say stakeholder, about the various implication. But honestly, do they really need us to understand that decoupling of the economy will simply call for inflation? Have we forget the story? Have we forget our history? Do we need a CEO from a poor semiconductor company to say decoupling is not so great? As what is great is what said Gregg. Okay, we know that we are missing professional. It's very good that the semiconductor will be spread over the world. It's very good. For this reason, decoupling of the economy, I think, it's basic economical science to say it's not great. To fight against the inflation, it's a globalization with some rules, I repeat, rules on environment and rules on ESG and rules on incentive to play with the same, let's say, rule of the game, period. But to do the peace, to convince people at authorities, is not our job.
Look, Rashid, I mean, I agree with Jean-Marc. We are not politicians. But what we can do, and I think what we are all busy doing, is try to explain the impact, the positive impact of semiconductors, but also the complexity of our supply and value chains. I mean, I've fallen off my chair a couple of times through the past 2 years, how little understanding politicians have had, and maybe still have in some cases, about how this industry works, how global it is, and what our products are actually impacting in the good in the end. And I believe that's the piece which we can do, because if politicians better understand what this industry is all about and what fragmentation of this industry does in terms of negative, then I think we've at least done one step.
Yeah, and I think we touched it before a little bit. First of all, I agree. We are CEOs of companies. Politicians have to do their job. But if we come to a more stable picture where the political systems will be in competition in future, and to which sort of applications and systems that apply, obviously military, surveillance, AI, I don't know, whatever, but also areas of clear cooperation, because once again, it's in our interest, it's in mankind's interest to get to a green economy in China. And if that picture would already be stable, I think we would have a big win already, and that I would call it a wish rather than an advice.
Yep. Thanks very much. That was the end already. Thanks for listening to us. Thanks for discussing this discussion. I think we've covered a broad field, very interesting topic. If you want to learn more, just read the Handelsblatt, right? Well, now comes the best part. On behalf of Messe München, I can invite you to the reception outside, have food and drink and good talks. And well, thanks for listening this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay.
Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank.